or they self-medicate, which is extremely common. With alcohol, weed, which is extremely potent now, and you could get THC from like a vape pen. So it's very powerful, very accessible. When I was in high school, my stoner friends would have to like go on a walk to the park and roll a joint. Now, with the vape, you can hit that anywhere, I guess.
Of course.
It's very discreet. They also do psychedelics. I think that's a huge part of it. And
how is that a huge part of it?
I think that a lot of them get turned on. They'll do alcohol, marijuana, and then I think they get into psychedelics like LSD or MDMA. And I think those things induce psychosis. These psychoactive drugs, whether it's marijuana by itself or it's LSD, I think they tend to induce psychosis and exacerbate those like existing problems. And basically what happens, I would say that is maybe the next step. And then the other ingredient that's always there is, although they don't have a social life in the real world, they have a social life on the internet.
Yes.
And so they're deeply involved in obscure internet forums, Discord, gaming communities. So increasingly, ChatGPT is inducing psychosis. People talk to ChatGPT all day, all night. And you basically have, between the three of these things, they kind of go into like a different world. Between the psychoactive substances, the make-believe reality of the internet, totally disconnected from the real world, I think they enter into like this delusional state. And I think that's where that shooter in Minneapolis, I think that's what that was. I think if Tyler Robinson is found guilty, there's been some interesting screenshots about him and his transgender boyfriend. It's the same story there, if that's true. And I would imagine it was not dissimilar with the guy that showed up and tried to kill me. I think those are always the ingredients that produce that kind of violence.
It's interesting, your audience, as I imagine it, I've never seen any of your numbers. I don't even know how big your audience is. It seems big to me, but I think of them as young men. Mm-hmm. That's the bulk of your audience, right?
Yes.
And yet here you are criticizing weed and video games and the internet, and you work on the internet. You are a creation. I mean, you wouldn't exist without the internet, of course. You didn't get a job at NBC News. So what kind of reaction do you get when you criticize weed, gaming, and the internet to young men?
A lot of them agree with it because they get it. It's their life. A lot of them, that's their life. Their life is, and another thing we didn't even bring up is the porn thing, which is there also. This is their life. Weed, gaming, porn. And I think they know it's bad. I think they know there's like some sense of guilt. And so it's interesting. I would say it's maybe an 80-20 split, where 20% say, oh, you're against weed? Not cool, man. It's just a plant. Well, they're very defensive about it, about these addictions. And I think 80% say, I know I have a problem. Like, I have a guilty conscience. I know it's bad. I know it's terrible.
Why are you against weed?
Because I think that it's compromises the integrity of your mental faculties. I think there's something deeply wrong with that. When you, I'm against alcohol too. I think it's wrong to numb pain. I think pain is a part of life. I think sobriety is should be experienced. And I think that weed is even worse because I think that, one, it's very dangerous. There's a lot of numbers now out of California and Washington that people are going to the hospital for psychosis. People are going crazy because of it.
It's also more subtle and therefore more insidious. You can't, I've done it. If you have a, 12-pack for breakfast, everyone knows. But if you take a hit off the dab pen, nobody knows. Mm-hmm. So you can use it all the time.
Yeah. And it makes you a loser. It makes you lazy. People that are addicted to weed are not motivated, don't care about anything other than weed. There's sort of an irony there where I used to hang out with a lot of stoners in high school. I never smoked weed, but all my friends did. And they were so chill and relaxed and didn't care about anything. But if you criticized weed, they would freak out and get extremely defensive.
Yes, I've noticed.
Right? If you insinuate that it's addictive, if you say it's a problem, they get very junkie behavior. And so I've always hated it. I think it's disgusting.
So I had no idea that Nick Fuentes had this opinion on marijuana before this interview, mainly because a lot of the other interviews, the people interviewing him, he just is always on the defensive. If you watch the Candace Owens interview, they spent like an hour just hashing out personal grievances. You said this, you said that, blah, blah, blah. Just boring shit that really nobody cares about besides the two of them. So this is, very commendable of Tucker again for letting Nick just speak about the things that he believes in. I will say on the marijuana thing, I will say from personal experience on the marijuana thing, when I was 18, 19, I had a friend who actually became schizophrenic after he smoked. But it was at the time, we're talking over a decade ago. At the time, you didn't really have dab. Like dabs were first, the concentrates were first coming around. He smoked something. It was called hash oil, but would have been like an early form of a dab. It was at a music festival. I think it was Wakarusa, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if Wakarusa is still even a festival, but he went to Wakarusa, smoked hash oil, and essentially went crazy. And he still is. He still battles with schizophrenia today. As far as I'm concerned, I don't actually know 100%, but that is a common thing that you can hear. Schizophrenia typically starts in early adulthood like that, and marijuana can exacerbate it and can kind of trigger those symptoms. So that is a very real thing. Also, there are people, some people love weed. I've known people that can smoke and smoke and smoke and inhale it constantly and it not affect them. Some people like to take a few hits, and then there's some people that, like, if they try it at all, it gives them like extreme paranoia and they don't like it, or that makes them black out. I've heard people say that. So it is it's not necessarily this big innocent thing that, kind of that was the attitude maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago of like, oh, come on, man, it's just a plant. That there is more to it than that, and it is interesting that Nick brings that up. I do not personally think that marijuana should be illegal. You're wasting a lot of police resources. You're putting people in jail. You're affecting people's lives for something that they're doing that's not affecting anyone else. I mean, really, if you're a drug addict in general, you're not affecting anyone else. You're affecting yourself. But I mean, for there to be a crime, there has to be a victim. To accuse somebody of a crime, you have to be impeding somebody else's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Things like drugs, things like prostitution, they don't do that. You're not affecting anyone but yourself, essentially. You can call them moral declines, you can call them not good for your soul, whatever. That's all fine and dandy, but the idea that we need to legislate morality, first of all, it never works. If there's a demand for something, there will always be a market for it. Somebody will supply it. In the United States, drugs are illegal, and largely the Mexican cartels have supplied the Americans with drugs. And now, as we can see in Mexico, these cartels are essentially paramilitary organizations. They rival the Mexican government in military strength. To the point where there's areas in Mexico that are effectively owned by the cartel, where they have sovereignty. They're like their own nation, right? So, but very interesting that Nick has that opinion on weed. I did not know that.
What is porn exactly? Like, describe how available is porn? What is it? I know what porn is, but like, you said it's a huge factor in the lives of young men and a bad factor. Why?
Well, this is another thing where it's reality distortion. That's kind of the theme. Just like psychedelics distort reality, just like a kind of internet society is a form of delusion, so is porn, in the sense that, a lot of people maybe don't realize, and we talked about this a little bit, people are getting turned on to porn when they're like 10 years old. And when you are going through puberty, when you're developing your sexual faculties, how could you stay away from that? Every kid has a phone, every kid has an iPad, and every iPad and phone is, if you if you know what it is, loaded up with porn. And it's infinite and it's ubiquitous and you can get every kind of it you want, whenever you want. It's in your pocket. And so something that is almost never talked about is that this is a generation that's totally sexually dysfunctional, I think, because of pornography. And some people are able to cope with it. Some people don't have a problem. But I think a lot of people, and maybe even a small minority, have a serious problem with it. And the problem...
How does it make people sexually dysfunctional?
I think that it's impossible for a real woman to compete with the availability and the novelty of pornography. A real woman, like without getting graphic, she's only one person, and maybe she wants to do something sexual, maybe she doesn't. Porn is, you could have 100 different women in one sitting doing anything. That whatever niche or idiosyncratic thing a person might be into, it's there. And so I think that novelty combined with that availability, it makes it so that, when you think about courting a woman, juice isn't worth the squeeze. And so there's like also a problem of like erectile dysfunction, people that can't enjoy regular sex because it does not compare to the intensity, the novelty, and the availability of porn. It's hyper stimulation. And so I think that's sabotaging a lot of normal sexual relationships.
It seems like it's making a lot of people gay too.
Yeah, and trans.
You think that's true?
100%.
What is that?
I think that the novelty is a huge part of that. I think that if you are somebody that uses pornography multiple times per day, which many people do.
Actually?
Oh, absolutely.
That's a lot of jerking off.
It's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And, if you're doing that multiple times a day, every day, for years, since you're a kid, well, eventually you get bored.
Yeah.
And you want to move on to something more extreme. And you're kind of, it operates, I think, similar to like a drug. You kind of have the same kind of resistance to it that you would to a drug, or a tolerance for it. And you're always chasing that initial feeling the first time you used it or the first time you saw a certain thing. And I think eventually you just chase more taboo, more transgressive. And I think maybe some people are more prone to that than other people, going in a really extreme direction.
Is how Charlie Sheen got AIDS, actually.
Yeah.
Through just being jaded and looking for something more transgressive. That's just a fact.
And there's something too about what it does when you look at it. Because people don't realize that it is a fundamentally different experience being involved in intercourse versus watching other people have intercourse. And I think that actually does something to you.
Tell me, what do you mean?
I think that, for example, I think Steve Saylor has written about this, that there's multiple kinds of transsexuals. And he says that one kind of transsexual is somebody that likes the idea of seeing themselves as a woman. It's autogynephilia.
Yes.
And I think that, one of the theories for that is you watch a man having sex with a woman that isn't you so much, you kind of achieve an identity with the woman in like a weird, sick way. You almost identify with the woman. And so there's weird things that happen when you're watching that and having such strong emotional and sexual experiences with it.
That's fascinating. I've sensed for a long time, having had a lot of young male employees mention porn as a problem. I mean, the big porn companies give visibility to foreign intel services on the back end. So that means people know what you're looking at. There's likely video and audio of you watching. So that, that's like such a deal killer for me. I'm not a huge expert on the topic, but I have always sensed this was a huge deal, but I've always been too embarrassed to do a show on it.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like you're describing something that's everywhere, that affects everybody, and that is, do you think it's related to the huge decline in actual sex and relationships and marriage, screwed up dating? All of this derives in part from porn, do you think?
I think it's a huge part of it. It's a huge factor. And it's even on the other side too. It's become so destigmatized for women to actually participate in porn. People don't even recognize that OnlyFans is a whole separate category. It's an innovation in the realm of pornography, because you have what everyone considers, what everyone knows as porn, which is like videos of porn stars, like dedicated career sex workers having sex in a relatively controlled environment or something like that. But then you get OnlyFans, which is like Patreon for nudes or sex. And basically, there's now a very large subculture, much larger than people want to admit, of women who the moment they turn 18, that is what they do, is they make an OnlyFans account and they become an amateur porn star. And it is completely casual, you know, because you could say that maybe 10 years ago, even at the heyday of internet porn, to be in porn, you got to be a porn star. Like that's your life and that's your career and that's who you are. And it's very shameful. With OnlyFans, it's like having a TikTok. It's like, here's my link tree. Here's my Instagram account. Here's my Facebook account. Here's my YouTube. And here's my OnlyFans.
Why would any of this be legal?
I think that, well, there's, like you indicated, maybe there's an intelligence benefit to that.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a political benefit to that. I think that...
Well, why wouldn't you arrest the people who run something like that?
They should be. If you had a Christian government...
Or how about just a government that cares about its people? I mean, is Iran a bigger threat or is OnlyFans? Iran's not turning my daughters to prostitution that I'm aware of.
Right.
Right? I mean, that seems like one of the worst things that could happen to any society.
Oh, absolutely.
So how big is the support for that? Like if a candidate were to come out and say, we ought to arrest the guys who own MindGeek, which is the biggest, I think it's the biggest porn supplier in the world, or the guys who run OnlyFans, what would the reaction be among, I don't know, people under 50?
I think there would be broad support for that.
Really?
I do, actually, yes.
I hope someone will say that. And
someone needs to.
I hope someone arrests them, like right away.
Yeah. That was actually
seizes their assets and puts them in prison.
Well, seizes their bodies and puts them in jail. Yeah, I mean.
The owners of that, people who are, I mean, talk about human trafficking.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
I thought we were against human trafficking.
Yeah. Well,
so but you think that young people, because you always think of young people as so liberal, but like, no, they wouldn't think that was crazy?
No, I think especially among young men, they know it's a problem. It's ruining their lives.
Crazy opinion there by Nick. I had no idea that he had that stance on porn and pornography. It should just be pointed out, too, Nick he talks about it in this interview. He's never lived with a woman. I don't know what his relationship or love life is like, but I don't think he's had a girlfriend since all of this, you know, from going to college and all of this till today. That's going to be about, I think he's 26 now, so that's about 8 years now where he hasn't been with a woman. I would imagine he's not going to admit it, but I would imagine he's been personally affected by what he's talking about here, and that's how he has such a deep, intimate knowledge of it. He brings up some interesting things. His solutions aren't quite, I don't agree with his solutions, but he does bring up some interesting things. And the first thing that he brings up is that young men going through puberty are exposed to porn right away and start looking at it. And that is a big thing. I would argue that everybody, even Generation X, grew up with, they would find a stash of their dad's Playboys in the attic. And then you get to, my generation, millennials, we were on the internet. We were exposed to internet porn, in our early teens. And I do want everyone to think about what it would be like if the first time you were ever with a woman in person was the first time you were experiencing any sort of sexual activity. If you didn't have all of this porn, what that experience your first time would have been like. It would have been almost magical. It would have been the first time you were ever seeing boobs. It would have been the first time you were ever, anything remotely sexual would be experienced firsthand, and it would be a much, much different experience than what I imagine your first experience was actually like. He calls it reality distortion, and he says that, real women can't compete with it. There's a lot that's been talked about that. I think most people agree. It is interesting that probably 10 years ago or so, there was this idea that porn and by extension masturbation wasn't bad at all. There was nothing wrong with it. And people, especially men, have come around and actually said, No, actually, this does cause issues. Actually, I am experiencing issues in real life. So interesting to see that cultural shift there, and kind of an admittance by men. You know, I got to tell you, I have a son who's 9 years old, and I have no idea what I'm going to do as he gets a little bit older. You know, because he has a phone. It doesn't have service, but he has a cell phone and he has a laptop. And you know, I've been thinking about it a lot lately of what am I going to do? Because you can't. It's impossible to think that you can filter 100% of sexual images off. Like, he has Google. You can get on Google. You can get on YouTube even, and you can search for things and find things that are, maybe not as intense as a real porn site, but still pretty intense. Now, of course, Nick and Tucker's solution to this is, why don't we just arrest the people doing it? Why don't we just arrest the pornographers? Well, there's no real mechanism to do that. It's free speech. It's legal. It's freedom of whatever. I mean, this is America. We don't live in a place like England. We don't have 12,000 arrests this year for social media posts. We do have an inherent sense of freedom and freedom of choice in America, and there is a belief of Americans that we should be allowed to do what we want to do in the privacy of our own homes if we're not hurting anybody. And I don't know that idea of let's ban pornography or let's arrest pornographers, I don't think that has broad public support. But it is interesting. It seems like both Nick and Tucker do agree on that. I will also say that Tucker brings up the foreign intelligence connections to the largest distributors of porn. He says that they give visibility on the back end to foreign intelligence, Mossad, probably not Russian FSB, but maybe MI6 or Scotland Yard or whatever. Foreign intelligence can see what you're watching if they so desire. So that's something interesting brought up by Tucker. I didn't know that. Tucker does have himself connections to intelligence services. His father worked in the CIA. Tucker tried to join the CIA. I have a whole video on that if you're curious about Tucker's CIA connections. But Tucker, kind of involved in that world and probably has a much better grasp on these things than your average Joe Blow on the street there.